Hello, everyone. My name is Kenzie Dodds, and I'm going to talk to a meetup. So, yeah, I'm gonna the talk that I'm giving today is ES6 modules, and I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen for most of the time, so you won't have to look at me, which is great for everybody. So let's go ahead and this is the meetup that I'm going to be talking with. I'm really excited to chat with you all. Learn to code websites and apps at Irvine, California, and yeah. Oh yeah, and really grateful for Mr. Dash putting this thing together. This in particular, actually don't join that Hangout because that is going to put you in the video stream, and so then you'll be broadcast as well. I mostly just wanted one person to be in there so that we could know when to start, but technical difficulties happen sometimes. So this is what you should be looking at right now. And it looks like a group of 3 people, hi there, Pat, are watching in Utah, which is kind of fun. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that there. But at the end of my talk, I'll go ahead and stick around in the chat to answer questions. So if you do have any questions, feel free to just throw them up in here, and I will come back here when I'm all done and the recording stopped and stuff. So great, let's go ahead and jump into it. So ES6 modules, more than you want to know. So yeah, this is a bunch of stuff about me. If you want, my slides are right here, so you can check those out later. They are hopefully useful. All of these things are linked, and so if you are interested, you can go look at those things about me. So here's the origin story for this talk. I tweeted a couple months ago, I think I could give a 20 to 30 minute talk on ES6 modules. Unfortunately, I said unfortunately because it's just so complicated that it's just kind of weird that it's enough content to fill a talk, but it really is. In response to that, Ryan Florence said I could give an entire conference, and I said ES6 modules conf, and then Matt Zabriskie jumped in and said be careful because this is the kind of thing that started out React Rally. So I don't think there's going to be an ES modules talk or anything like that, but or conference. But anyway, that's kind of where this idea came from. It was mostly out of some strugglings that I'd had with ES6 modules, and I'd actually taught people ES6 modules incorrectly, some aspects of it. And so this talk is kind of me begging for forgiveness for teaching things wrong. And now I'm teaching things correctly, and I think that's a good thing. So here's a couple things about what this talk is going to be about. I'm going to give a brief history about JavaScript modules. We're going to look at the standard and syntax. Most of these things you will probably use a couple times, but like just a couple of them you'll use all the time. So not everything will be super useful, and you'll see lots of code. So again, not going to be 100% practical, but mostly it'll be good. So let's go ahead and get started. So a module, what is a module? So I like to think of module as like a chapter in a book. This actually comes from Preeti, who has a great blog post. I think I linked to at the end the idea of a module being a book or a chapter in a book. So chapters, if you think about like Harry Potter, maybe chapter 5 establishes like the fact that Harry's going to Hogwarts or something like that. And in chapter 3, then we're learning about like who Harry is and stuff. And so for us to understand like what chapter 5 is talking about, we have a dependency on chapter 3 to establish that context. And then chapter 3 has a dependent that is chapter 5. And so these interdependencies throughout this book. It also encapsulates a topic or logic. And so like chapters generally have a name or a title of the chapter that is supposed to like sum up the idea of that chapter. This maybe makes more sense when you're thinking about like a chemistry book or something like that, where it's like a specific topic. And so if you're doing your modules in like a reasonable way, your modules should encapsulate some specific topic or logic to make it easy for people to know what that module is all about. So brief history in JavaScript modules. So when JavaScript was created, it did not have modules, and so we kind of had to make them up. Because like initially it was fine to just sprinkle JavaScript throughout your web app, but as applications grew bigger, it became necessary to be able to organize things a little bit, and so we came up with this idea of globals. And here we've got this subtract module, and that is a function that depends on this add module, which is evidently also a function. And this has like some special funky syntax, a semicolon there because hipsters don't like writing semicolons for some reason. Just kidding, I'm one of those hipsters, as you can see. Haha. But I use a build step that adds them for me, so it's okay. Yeah, so we have this implicit dependency on this add module, and so like things got really complicated because you had to make sure you were loading dependencies in the right order. And if all of a sudden this subtract module needed to depend on something else in addition, then you would have to make sure that that other thing was loaded first. And so this, like, as cool as this was, it wasn't very cool. So then require.js came onto the scene with AMD, and AMD was a lot more reasonable. It made it possible for you to have explicit dependencies. And so here we have this explicit dependency on the add module, referencing a file in the file system. So require.js would go out, find that file, run its definition, and then it would pass whatever's returned from its definition to the definition of this module. And so here we have the add argument, and then we can use that. And so we have an explicit dependency. You can also, this is all done asynchronously. And so like with big applications where you have tons of modules, it was generally better to have a build step that would concatenate all these files together, and require would just load from that. Yeah, the basic idea was pretty similar to what we have today. But probably the most common, what most people are used to, is CommonJS. So CommonJS can't really do async, but you can bundle CommonJS. And so using like something like Webpack or Browserify or Rollup, or many of the, well, Rollup actually uses the ES6 module. So, it is possible to use Rollup with CommonJS. So anyway, that's the idea here. Is we have this require function that is just kind of globally available to us, and we can require specific modules, and then whatever that module exports is what we get, and then we can use that in our module. So that's 3 of the more common module patterns that we have. There are a multitude of others, but these are probably what most people are familiar with. Things are a little bit challenging when we have a lot of different standards, quote unquote, for modules. And that's why we're so excited and glad that ES6 modules are here. But the problem is they're only sort of here. So the syntax has been standardized. And I've heard that even browsers are able to parse that syntax, but they're not. There's no environment that I'm familiar with that's able to do anything meaningful with those modules. Because we can't load those modules yet. So this links to a little bit more information about the loader spec that you can go take a look at. Node is getting closer and closer to like coming up with a decision on how to do this loading. I'm not sure where browsers are yet, but it will be a while before they're like super useful. Nice thing is though that we have transpilers, and so we can use a transpiler to take ES6 module syntax and convert it into something that our bundler or the browser understands, and then we can use these modules, which is fantastic. And that's exactly what most people do. They use Babel or TypeScript to resolve these modules. Okay, so the rest of this talk, we're going to be looking at code and transpiled code. Just be aware that this can mislead you. And that's part of the reason why I misunderstood ES6 modules in the first place. Luckily, that bug has been fixed, and so now I understand them, and it's great. But yeah, just be aware that if you're trying to learn a spec, looking at transpiled code can be helpful, but it can also be misleading. So just be cognizant of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and start out. Actually, before I get going, I'm going to double check that things are going well. So it looks like nobody's complaining about sound or anything, which is great. So I'm going to keep on going. And maybe like partway through, I'll look at this again just to make sure. It's hard when I don't have somebody like on the call with me. Oh, it looks like somebody is on the call. Hey, Bridget. Okay,
hello.
Cool. So let's go ahead and I just realized if somebody's on the call, I wouldn't be able to hear them. So maybe, Bridget, I'm sorry if you said anything, but I'm going to mute you so that, yeah, and actually I'll hide you from the broadcast too so that nothing embarrassing happens. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and get started with export default. So you'll do this probably like all the time. Basically, what this allows us to do is we can have a function or a constant or like a variable of any kind, and make that available to consumers. And it's the default thing that is being exported. We don't need to give it a name or anything. We just say with the special syntax, the keyword export and the keyword default, and then this will be made available to consumers. We'll look more closely at the import side of things a little bit later, but that's basically what it looks like. If we look at the transpiled code, there's some fancy stuff going on here. We define a property on exports. So this is transpiling it down to CommonJS. And so we're adding this __ ES module property on exports with the value of true. And that just helps like runtimes be able to do some good things with these modules to like interop between CommonJS, like raw CommonJS modules and modules that have been transpiled. So if we have a little bit of time at the end, I will delve into how this works a little bit later. But for now, just know that modules that are transpiled by Babel will have this ES module property on their exports. So then we, like the actual meaty piece of this is the exports gets a default property, and that's assigned to the thing that we're exporting. And so with that, when I go to require this or something, if I were to use like CommonJS require, then I would have to use the default property off of that to have access to the add function, which is the default export. So that's export default. With a named export, it's basically the same, except you don't say default. And you can actually, yeah, this wouldn't work if you default. If you wanted that to work, then you remove the name. So anyway, without the default, then you give it a name, and that is the name by which it is imported. And so here we tack on the export keyword, and now consumers can import that by the name that we give it. So those are going to be the same. If I change this to bar, then I would have to import it as bar. All that this does is, because this is a variable, I can actually use this inside of here. So I could console log foo. And so because that's possible, Babel is going to create the variable here, and it's going to assign it to exports.foo, which is being assigned to bar here. Because foo is going to be assigned to bar. And that is a named export. For multiple named exports, it's actually quite simple. You have your, you just like basically tack on the export keyword in front of whatever it is that you want to export. And again, whatever it is you want to export has to be named, has to have a name of some kind. So like we were saying here with the export default, if we export default something with a name, then that doesn't work. In the same way, if we try to export something that doesn't have a name, then that's not going to work. We get this unexpected token export that's just like, what on earth is this even? So yeah, it needs to have a name. Same thing would happen with an arrow function as well. Yeah, that's interesting. But here, whatever you want to have exported, you just tack on the export keyword in front of it, and then that's made available. So here we have the subtract, we have now, and then we can import those, and we'll look more closely at that later. And all that's doing on the CommonJS side is it takes the exports object and it tacks on properties that are the same name as the thing that we're exporting. So we can actually do both of these things together. So here we're exporting a function called subtract, and we're exporting the const now, just like we were in the last one. But now we're also exporting a default, which is this object representing Chewy, our favorite. If you wanted to be able to use this object inside of this module itself, then you can actually give this a name. Like I was talking about a little bit before, you can't give it a name when you're exporting it. But we could say Chewy equals this object. And then we'll say export default Chewy. And now we can use Chewy inside of our module here. And also this object is being made available to our consumers. And so here you can import those. And again, we'll look at that a little bit later. So all that's doing here is the same thing that we saw before, just with these exports tacking on the properties. And then for the default, it tacks on a default property with that the object that we are exporting. Then on the named exports as list. So this is where like you've pretty much gotten pretty much everything that there is to know about like what you can export. Now it's just how you export these things. So this is actually the way that I prefer to do my exports is name as a list. So most of the time you're going to have just either a default export or named exports. You generally don't want to mix the two. And the reason for that is it I like to try and think of this in the context of a React application. So in React applications, you have component files or component modules, and those components are the things that you're exporting as the default. And I can't think of anything else that you would want to expose from that file. There are definitely some cases, but most of the time, if you need to share code between one React component and another React component, then you'll create another module that's maybe a utils module, and that will have named exports. And so generally you won't mix the two. There are definitely times where you might, and that's like totally legit. It's okay to do that. But like I said, most of the time you won't mix the two. So all of that said, I also recommend that you put your exports in a list when you're doing named exports in particular. The reason that I like to do that is because well, here we have this life in the universe, we have this add function, this subtract, and then we're exporting it. It almost looks like an object with default properties and values. The reason that I like to do this is because in a bigger file, let's say it's 200, 500 lines of code of a bunch of functions that are utility functions or something, I don't have to scroll around the file to know what is being exported. I just find the one place where the export exists, and I can see all of the functions, variables, everything that is being made available in that module. That to me is a really useful feature. Another thing that I just am going to throw out there is I also like to only export functions most of the time. There are a couple of times where it's like constant values and stuff, but if there's like a calculation of any kind going on, I generally, especially if you're like importing another module and making calculations based off of that module, I like to make a function that will do the calculation. You can call that function. There are a couple of reasons for this that I won't go too far into, but a lot of it has to do with the ability to test and just how easy it is to like to think about your modules. So generally, I just like to export functions. But yeah, this is how you do it. You have this curly brace and then a comma separated list of the things that you want to export. Now, I mentioned that this almost looks like an object, and it's very important that you understand it is not an object. And that can be a little bit confusing at times, but when we see here next that this is like very special and specific syntax to ES6 modules. So we can add aliases. So here we have life in the universe and add and subtract modules. And let's say that you're just not a very nice coworker and you wanted to troll all your coworkers and you wanted to rename add and subtract so that when people import add, what they're actually importing is subtract and vice versa. And so you can do this by saying export curly brace add as subtract and subtract as add. So this add is a special keyword or as is a special keyword inside of this export syntax that basically says take this add function, and when people import or just like name it subtract. And so when people want to import this function, they have to use the word subtract, and vice versa for add. And then we don't have to do it for all of them. We'll just leave with life in the universe right there. And so then when people go to import add, they're going to import the actual subtract module. So that's 4 and 3 is going to be equal to 1. So please don't do that. Your coworkers would not like that. But if we look at the CommonJS version of this, all that it's doing is taking exports, tacking on a subtract property, because that's what it's going to be known as, and assigning it to the add function, which is what's being exported. Cool. Actually, one little pro tip I'm gonna stop and say really quick is if you ever look at some syntax and you're confused about it, like you're not sure what it is, then copy that and go to astexplorer.net and paste that code in astexplorer.net, and then click around to where it is that you're confused about. And then if you look on this right side, it's going to show you what's called an AST. And if you, I've actually given a talk on ASTs. If you want to go look at that, and another time, just go to kcd.im/talks. Here, that's kcd.im/talks. And you can find a beginner's guide to ASTs. But anyway, here we have this export add as subtract. I'm going to just put this as right there. And we're going to find that this is called an export specifier. And it's inside of this specifiers array of an export named declaration. And so here, as part of this export specifier, there's, and you'll notice it's highlighting, as I hover over stuff here, it's highlighting over here, which is pretty handy. As part of this export specifier, we're going to have an identifier, and that's the add. You'll see it's highlighting there. And that's the name of it, is add. And then what's the exported, what this is going to be known as, is the subtract, and that's also an identifier. And so if you look at some syntax and you're like, what on earth is that? You copy and paste it into AST Explorer, and then you have an actual name of something to go look up in Google. So you can say JavaScript export specifier, and you can go look up documentation on that thing. So fun little tip for you that I found to be useful. Great. So then named export as default. So here we had the export list. And before we were exporting the variable chewy as the default. If we want to include the default in this list, then we can just simply say chewy as default. And then that will be exported as the default. People can import it like it's the default. So if for some reason that you were mixing the two named exports and default exports, and you wanted to just keep it all in a single line or like keep it all together, then you could do this. For me, in the rare cases where I am mixing the two, I like to just do it on two separate lines. That totally works. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So whichever way you want to do. Great, and then the basic import. We're going to go on to the import side of things. So the most basic import that you can get is just import and then a reference to the file, the module that you're importing. And so up here, this is what that module might look like. Like generally, you are not going to want to do this. There are a couple instances where I've done stuff like this. Like if I'm using the CSS and style loader with Webpack, then I'll import magic.css or whatever, and that will just get like slapped onto the page. There aren't too many or maybe if you've got an analytics tool that just like does some magic global stuff going on, then that might be another use case. But most of the time, if you're not importing something specific from a module, then that's a code smell that's basically saying this thing needs to be loaded, and there's no like explicit dependencies going on here, which makes your application more difficult to think about, and like you have to make sure that you're loading things at the right time and stuff. That makes things a little tricky. So if you're doing this in your code, don't do that. But it's totally a reasonable thing to do. You can do it, and it works. So what you normally will be doing is importing a specific thing from a module. So here we have this export default, and we're exporting this list of cool cats, Ben Lesh and Brian Holt. They are cool cats. And then to import that, you use the import keyword, and then the name of the thing that you're importing. So whatever, and you can call this whatever you want it to be. It can be foobar. It doesn't matter. You can call it whatever you like. And then the from, and then specifying where you're going to be importing this default value from. So like the module name. So what that's doing on the Babel side is it first requires that module that you are importing from, and assigns that to a variable. Then it does this fancy interop required default stuff that depends on that ES module thing that we were looking at before. I'll explain this a little bit more later, but yeah, basically from that it takes the results of that and uses the coolcats2 variable throughout your code. Yeah, coolcats2 default, and that'll give you Ben, Lash, and Brian Holt. So then you can import named things. And so if we have this math thing that's exporting add and subtract, then we can import that in a very similar fashion with the import keyword and then these two import specifiers from that math module. And then we can use those things, which is fantastic. So you can also alias things. So let's say that your coworker was really mean and aliased add, subtract, and and a WAT function or so, like something weird like that. So you could actually rename those on the import side. And so you say, okay, I want to import add, but that's actually the subtract function. So I'm going to rename it to subtract. And then I'm going to import subtract, and that's the add function. So I'm going to import it as WAT just because I'm feeling funny right now. And then that you use the name as what, like inside of your own module, inside your own code. So we're not using add at all in this module. We use subtract and we use WAT because that's what we're calling them. This, like the whole troll idea isn't really like useful or practical. Where this becomes really useful is if, let's say, you're importing a couple of things from a couple different modules. So let's say I'm importing add and subtract like other thing. And then this other module has something called add and subtract. And so I want to name those differently. So this would be add 1 and subtract 1 or something like that, whatever you want to call it. But this helps you avoid naming collisions. And I think that's one of the main reasons why it exists. Another great reason is if you had let's say you had another module that exported an install or configure export. And inside of your code, configure is kind of an ambiguous name. It doesn't really make sense, maybe. And so you could alias that as configure the missiles or something like that. So that's the aliasing your imports. And then import default. So this one actually, like, this is definitely in the 100% or in the remaining 10% that's like not useful at all to you. And that is that you can, as far as syntax goes, you can totally import default as like a named import. But that doesn't really do anything great for you because you can't like console log defaults. That like won't compile, won't transpile. So where you can't like invoke default or anything like that. So this one is not really useful. Where it is useful though is you can alias that. And that's not entirely useful either because you alias it yourself anyway. But if you did want to import like your named imports and your default export on a single line inside of this these curly braces, then you could do it that way. So we have this animals from the default, zebra and kangaroo. Then we have other animals that we're importing. These two things will actually be referenced to the exact same object in memory. So that is how it works. So if you do, though, want to import the default and the named exports on a single line, something that's a little bit more common to do is to import the default. So just like you would, here, we'll just remove this for a sec. So you'd do the normal default import, and then you would add a comma, with these curly braces to import the specific named exports that you want. So random cat and add cat, and that will give you the default and then those two named exports. And then you can use those inside of your code by those names. Then you could alias these as well, just with the same kind of syntax that we saw before. Great, so then import star. So this is, I think this is the last like useful import thing that we're going to talk about now. So here we can import everything, the default and all the named exports as all animals or whatever you want to call it. And then you can get the default off of the default property. And then you can get all the named exports as properties on this object by the name that they're being exported. I don't use this one a whole bunch, but I do use it sometimes if there's a module that has like a utilities module that I'm going to be using a bunch of the utilities from or something. Often that can be useful, especially if it's like that configure like named export that we were talking about a second ago. That can be like useful to just import star, and then you know exactly what it is that you're configuring. Great, so now we're kind of going back to the export side of things, but a couple magic things. Before I get into that, I'm just going to double check the live stream that everything is good. Yeah, okay, looks like we're doing all right. Okay, so let's say that you have a module and you want to import everything from another module and then take all those same imports and export those from your own module. So a really great use case for something like this would be you have a utilities folder that has a whole bunch of modules with a bunch of utilities, and then you want to enable somebody to import a single file and get all of those utilities. And so this would be a great way to do that. So the syntax is simply export keyword and then star, indicating like everything, and from, and then the module that you want to get all the stuff from. And you can do the same with other module. And so here, if we have export const foo and export const bar, then we go ahead and say export everything from those two. And now this module right here, so the ./module is basically exporting with named exports all of the things from the other two modules together. And the way that works is actually kind of interesting, so I'll show you. What that's doing is here we're going to, because we are doing imports, exports, we're going to get, or specifically exports, we're going to get this ES module export property. And then we're going to require the other module here that we're doing there. And again, this is like the CommonJS version of this, equivalent of this syntax. And then we're going to go through all of the keys on other module. And so long as the key default, or we're not looking at the key default or the key ES module, which is tacked on by Babel, then we're going to define a property on exports by that key, and we're just going to like get it from the other module. So this is all implementation details of Babel. Again, this is transpiled code. This is not how it works under the hood at all. This just hopefully is instructive on how things semantically work. And so then we also have other module. We're going to do the exact same thing. And actually, just as this appears also in the spec, if there are conflicts in names, so let's say we had export const bar equals my bar. So here now in other module, we're exporting bar, and we're exporting everything from other module. So this export is going to have bar. And then we export everything from other module, and this does also have bar. Then the bar from other module is going to win, and the bar that people import will be equal to just bar, not my bar. Great. So then you can export a list from specific things. So let's say that, like, actually, I should mention in this transpiled output, you'll notice, like I mentioned before, if it's the default, then we're not going to add it to what we're exporting. So export star skips the default. If you wanted to have that default, then you can pull it out with export and then curly brace default. And you can have other named exports as well. So if this module had a whole bunch of exports and you only wanted to forward on a couple others, a couple of those, then you can be specific about which ones, including the default. And that's that. So we can go into interop require. We do have some time. So hold on to your hats because this is kind of confusing. But this is what Babel is doing. And again, this is some more of the stuff that's like more than you need to know because this is implementation details from Babel. But let's start out with the problem and why Babel is doing what it's doing. So first, the problem is not all modules. Well, first off, we're exporting or we're transpiling down to CommonJS so that this is consumable in Node or Webpack 1 or environments that don't understand ES6 modules. And so that's an important thing to note. The other thing is often in applications, we're going to be using both modules that are exposing themselves as CommonJS modules as well as those that are exposing themselves as ES6 modules. Most of the time, the ES modules will be like our own code, and modules that we have from NPM will be using CommonJS. And so Babel has this, because it's transpiling down to CommonJS, it has to be able to distinguish between the transpiled CommonJS modules and those that were exposed as CommonJS modules. So Lodash is an example of one that is exposed as a CommonJS module. And here we have this coolcats that is being exposed as ES6 module. So the important thing to know here is that coolcats, when it's transpiled, is going to have the ES module, the __ ES module property. That's going to be true. But Lodash will not have that property. And that's the key characteristic or the key difference between these two. That interop require default is going to exploit. So let's follow the path with coolcats. So let's, I'm going to go ahead and in the comments here, that's where I'm going to put it. So at this point, var coolcats is going to be equal to a require of coolcats. And if you remember the transpiled version of export default and export const is going to result in first an object that has, let's back that up. First, an object that has __ ES module is true because Babel is going to transpile that export and be like, oh, okay, this is the ES module. The next thing that it's going to have is a default property with those two on it. So let's say default, Ben Lish and Brian Holt. And then it's also going to tack on a favorite tech property onto that export. And that'll be RxJS. And that is what coolcats is going to look like at this point. Now, if we call into interop require default, we're going to now have a new object, entirely, well, not entirely new reference or anything, but we'll have a new object here. And let's take a look at the interop require default function now. So this function is going to be added to actually every module that is using imports and being transpiled to CommonJS. This might scare you for a second, but don't worry. If you're gzipping your code like you should, then this should probably have a pretty minimal impact. It's also a very small function. In fact, if we minify it, poof, it is do interop require default object return. Like it's pretty small. Yeah. Okay, so here we have this interop require default, takes an object, and it's going to return object and object.es module. So this is a ternary operator. So if the object exists and it has a property called __ ES module, and if we look at coolcats, it does. So we'll continue. Then we're going to return the object itself. And so we're actually getting a copy of this module. It's going to be exactly the same reference, everything. It's exactly the same. We can double equal or triple equal coolcats and coolcats2, and we'll get true. So then throughout our module here, we're going to see coolcats2 being referenced for the default, and then And so that's going to give us this default here. And then we're going to see the coolcats module being used for favorite tech. Incidentally, we could be using the coolcats2 object to get favorite tech because they are the same object. But this is a special case for the modules that aren't transpiled with this ES module thing. So let's take a look at the Lodash scenario, and that's where things are going to get really enlightening here. So when we import Lodash, when we require it, it's going to give us back an object that has all of Lodash methods. So we'll have get function, and we'll have the each function, and we'll have the map function. Actually, I think each was renamed to for each. Whatever, all of those functions that are available. We'll just stick with get because that's the only one we're importing. So it's going to give us get, and that is basically what the Lodash requires going to be. So then when we go through the interop required default, we're going to get now a Lodash2, and that will equal an object. And let's see what that object looks like. So first we're going to say, okay, does the object exist? Yes, it does. Does it have an ES module property? Oh, no, it does not. So let's go to the other side of the ternary. The other side has us returning an object that has a default property. And so we'll say default, and that property is going to be whatever Lodash was itself. So we could actually say Lodash right here, but just to make it a little bit more clear, that's what it's going to look like. So this is this is where things are really like the distinguishing difference between these two. Is ES6 modules are going to have an ES module property on it, and so that means that both the initial require and the result of interop require default will be the exact same. For those that aren't transpiled, they are going to be an object that has a default property with all of the properties on it. And so then when we come around to here, if we look, we're going to console log Lodash, and then we'll console log get. Then we're going to use Lodash.default to get the default, which in this case will be this whole object. And then we'll use Lodash.get to be sure that we get the get function. So if Babel were just using Lodash2 for everything, then it would have to be Lodash2.default.get, which would work just as fine, but it wouldn't minify it as well, I guess. Maybe that was the decision. I'm not sure why, but that's how it works. Is yeah, it's using the original require to for any of the named exports or the named imports. So hopefully that made sense. If not, you can check out the slides and look through the code, maybe step through stuff like this in a debugger or something. Yeah, so that's all the code. Let's go ahead and just wrap up with a couple other things here. So this is a link to a blog post that I wrote called, what is it called? I don't even remember. It is called Misunderstanding ES6 Modules, Upgrading Babel, Tiers, and a Solution. I wrote this back in, when did I write this? December of last year. And basically what I'm talking about in this blog post is a situation when Babel upgraded or released Babel 6 from Babel 5, and in that process, they fixed a long-standing bug that resulted in people being able to use ES6 modules incorrectly. So how was that? I did this in tons of places in my code. I would create a, let's big screen this again. I would create a variable called foo, for example, and it would be assigned to an object, and then I would export that object as the default export for my module. And then with Babel 5, I could get a hold of Baz just as if it were a named export. So you all know, because you just watched this talk, or because you already knew, that this isn't actually how it works. You can only import named exports in this way. What was happening in the transpiled version is this was destructuring out the Baz property. Well, it wasn't even really doing this. It was just plucking off the Baz property from the foo object. And that was being exported as the default. So that was a problem because yeah, that's not ECMAScript standard. And so in Babel version 6, they made it so with this like adding the default property as like on the exports and removing the module.exports equals default, which is what they used to do. So what that resulted in is if you wanted to be able to get the Baz property off of the foo object, then you would have to have import foo from /foo to get the default first, and then you could destructure Baz off of foo, which would work great, and everything was happy. So the reason that the ECMAScript standard forces you to do this, because like you might think, oh, well, that's kind of sad. I want to be able to like destructure things as I'm importing them and whatever. The reason that it's this way is because one of the key characteristics of ES6 modules is that they are statically analyzable. The fact of the matter is that this foo object can be as dynamic as all get out, and you can like monkey patch things on it, and you can like put new properties on it at runtime and make up names and even random property names, whatever you want on this object, and then you can export it. And if you were able to import specific properties off of that object with the import syntax, then it wouldn't be statically analyzable. You wouldn't be able to know ahead of time whether that property is even available on that object. And so there are a lot of benefits to this, not the least of which is the ability to lint against that. So because linter doesn't actually run your code, it just analyzes it statically. We can use actually ESLint plugin import. It's a super awesome plugin, one of my favorites. And it is able to say, okay, you're importing something from foo. So I'll go look at foo and make sure that it has an export that is the default, because you're trying to import the default. If it doesn't, then I can give you a warning. And if it wasn't statically analyzable, that wouldn't be possible. Or that's not entirely true, but it wouldn't be like totally reasonable and all the way accurate in that sense. Yet another thing that's really important aspect of this fact that things are statically analyzable and that this bug was fixed is the ability to do tree shaking, which is kind of like a buzzwordy thing that you may have heard of, that Rollup made really possible, and Webpack 2 is capable of now. Basically, the idea is if you have a bunch of named exports and like our add and subtract module, let's say in my application, I'm only using the subtract function. I'm not using the add function at all. Because ES6 modules are totally statically analyzable, Webpack or Rollup can go through my module imports and mark things as unused. And when it's marked as unused, it's not going to be exported, and Uglify or your Minify or whatever, it's going to delete that unused code, and that will be a great thing for everybody. So that is the idea behind statically analyzed or statically analyzable modules. There are a couple other benefits to that, but those are some important ones. Great, so here's a list of some resources you can take a look at. There's actually a repo version of these slides, all that code that you saw, so you can like clone that and run it and see what it looks like and stuff. And that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast now, but I'm pretty sure that the chat should still work on the YouTube side of things. And so if you want to chat with me, feel free to stick around there. If by chance it does close down, then I'll be on Twitter, or you can hit me up on Gitter, or like whatever you want to hit me up on stuff. So thanks. And oh yeah, and if you want to give me feedback, I always appreciate feedback. I want to make these talks better and help more people. So see you around.